Hi, I'm Johnny from ultimatepapier-mâché.com, and this is lesson number 2 in a little class that we're doing on how to make a papier-mâché cat. And in the first lesson, I showed you how to make a pattern using a photograph of a cat. If you've already made your pattern, or if you've decided to use the one that I posted out on my blog, then we're ready to go on our next part of the project. And that is to turn this paper pattern into pieces of cardboard in these shapes, and then use that and then use those cardboard shapes as the armature for our cat sculpture. If you want to make your cat in a different size than the one that's printed out on your paper pattern, then you have to do a little bit of math, but not very much. On this particular pattern, this is the one that I drew the grid on in my pencil, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares high from the bottom of the toes up to the top of the head. If I wanted a 12-inch high cat, I just divide 12 by 5. And I think that there's 7 squares on the pattern that I posted out on my blog for lesson number 1. So you just do the same thing and divide it by 7. I think in that case it's going to come really close to 1 3/4 inches for the squares that you'll need on your pattern. But do the math yourself. You can make your cat any size you want to. In fact, if you want to make a really big one, just use really big squares. This next part is just a little bit trickier because we're going to transfer each square, the drawing within each square on the pattern, to a larger square on the cardboard. And I hope you can see this actually. I know that pencil over dark cardboard is not real easy to see. Let me bring up a pen here. It might help. So, as you can see, I've actually drawn the body in white to make it just a little bit easier for me to know which is which. And you can determine that this white line starts about there in the square and then comes around like this. I do recommend that you use pencil rather than a pen though. So we're going to be doing this little section right here, and we're going to put it over here, and we only do that one little section at a time. Now I'm going to do this one. Obviously you don't need to draw on your pattern. I'm just trying to do this for illustration. And this one will come up and then starts about here. So now when you do use a pencil, you're able to go back over it after you get done, and if things aren't just quite the way you think that they should be, you can always go back through and change them. Like I said, I'm just doing this in pen right now, but I don't recommend that you use a pen when you're doing the final one. Now this is going to be a little bit trickier because it's an odd shape. So we're going to come up to about here, going to end here. Now also, if you've read my book, Make Animal Sculptures with Papier-mâché Clay, this is the same process we use in that book, and you'll know that this is going to be covered. So if you make minor wrinkles that don't belong, you don't do it quite exactly the way it should have been, it actually is going to be covered up with your clay anyway. So it's not a great tragedy. It's nice to have it as close as you can get it, but in other words, don't worry about it too much. Here we go. As you can see, I'm going to do this all the way along. I'm going to do the entire body of the cat, and then I'll move the board over and I'll do a copy of each leg. And then I'm going to cut the legs out on cardboard and use the cardboard leg as pattern for the second leg. There's no need to do this particular process for something that you can just draw around once it's cut out. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, and I'll see you just as soon as this is done. Now that I have the major pattern pieces drawn out here on the right sides, and again I've only done one leg because I'm going to trace around these after I cut them out. And now we just take a sharp blade. If you've been in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, you know you want to use a sharp blade because dull ones end up cutting your finger. So go ahead and do this very carefully. Okay, I have the pieces cut out that I drew on the pattern, and obviously I need 4 legs rather than 2, so I'll just go ahead and trace around those. I wasted a bit of cardboard here, as you can see. If I had been just a wee bit more careful, I would have probably used up about half as much cardboard. Once I have my pieces cut out, I like to use the pattern that I have here and determine where the legs are going to go in relation to the body, so, and just trace around it. You can see how the pieces all fit together here more easily than you might be able to if you were just holding the pieces together, you know, just trying to hold them up and figure out exactly where they go. Now obviously the pieces are not going to be flat like this. We don't want a flat cat, but this is going to help us when we put the legs on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on just for the front leg and one back leg. Just basically putting it on in the same position that the other one is at on my pattern. I'm doing this upside down. This is a little tricky. I wanted you to see how it goes. Okay, so now we would have a cat. It'll have to be adjusted, of course, a little bit when we're putting those legs on, but it gives us a good idea of where things go. I'm also seeing now that my upper shoulder may be too high. So there's a real good possibility that when I put the leg on and start bending things and getting ready to add the padding, that I might actually have to cut some of this off. But it's just cardboard, so you can easily do that. You can make adjustments all the way through this process and get it the way you really want it. The next step, of course, is to put the pieces together to make an armature. And the armature has to have the legs not just stuck onto the central piece. Obviously, they have to be separated out. At this point, you'll want to look at as many reference photos as you can from different angles, not just the flat one that I made you go look for in the last lesson. From this point on, we need as many references as we can from as many positions as we can get them, or just follow your own cat around if you have the patience to do that. Now, when I looked at my photographs of my cat sitting down from the front, it looked like it would be possible to put the legs on, and the front legs about an inch out from the body, and the back legs will need to be about 2 inches out. Now that obviously is going to depend on the size of your sculpture. That's just the way it's going to work for this particular pattern. You will want to go ahead and make that determination yourself based on the pattern that you're using, the photographs that you're using. But this I think is going to work. Cats, when they're sitting down, have the front legs are quite close together because their rib cage is very narrow compared to what most animals are. That's why they're so supple and they can move so easily. And that means that their front legs are very close together when they're sitting, and they actually will come in. Whoops. Get these out. They'll actually sit a bit like this in a wedge shape. Now we could cut wedge-shaped pieces of foam, which is what I'm going to be using to attach these, or we can just bend the cardboard, which I think in this case is going to be easier. Now I am going to be using foam, just some styrofoam pieces. I happen to have a whole lot of it sitting around the house. You can also find small pieces, sheets of styrofoam in 1-inch sheets at Walmart or at a craft store. And it's just the easiest thing to use. I put these on with a hot glue gun. You don't have to use styrofoam though. If you want to, you could also use just watered up pieces of newspaper and wrap those up with masking tape. This just happens to be a little bit easier and faster, so it's what I'm going to be using. The first thing you'll do, like I said, you want to determine how far out from that center line you want your legs to be. And I've determined that they're going to be 1 inch, and this just happens to be, whoops, yeah, they're 1 inch wide. So, okay. So I'm going to glue these on to the inside of each of my pattern. Now, this is something that I have problems with. I'm sure that you won't, but I do. You want to make sure that the pieces are opposite to each other. Flip one of them over to make sure that you're doing on the inside of both legs. Again, I know that was obvious, but it's sometimes not obvious to me. So, okay, we're just going to glue these on with some hot glue. The nice thing about using hot glue is that if you really don't get it in the right place the first time around, you can always just pull them off and start them over again. Sometimes it takes a little bit of prying, but that's okay. Now the back legs, I'm going to put 2 inches apart or out from that center line, so I'll need 2 pieces of foam glued together. And I know I've said this already, but do make sure that don't use the measurements that I'm giving out here. Just because it happens to work with the 1 inch and 2 inch for my sculpture, it really will depend on your own pattern and how big it is. The one thing to remember when you're cutting your styrofoam squares, about the only thing that really matters, is that they not be so large that the styrofoam would extend out over the cardboard, because that would mean that the styrofoam would be affecting the final shape of your sculpture, and you don't want to do that. Once I have my leg pieces glued to the styrofoam, I like to use these little finishing nails to determine, before actually gluing the pieces together, I want to determine that I've really got the right spot for them. So I go ahead and put the finishing nails through the cardboard and through the styrofoam, and then test it to make sure that it sits up solid. Now I can see if my table is flat, I can see that one of these back legs is not in the right place because it's wobbly. And I think maybe one of my front ones is wrong too. It's definitely crooked. So let's go ahead and pull it out and put it in the next spot. Just move it a bit. And just move them around until you actually have them. Oh, that actually fixed it. Just moving one worked. Now as you can see, I've got the finishing nails in there. It's just a temporary way to hold them together to make sure that the sculpture is going to sit flat and it looks the way I want it to. And I can do that without gluing them first, which is kind of nice. Now what I want to do, since I went to a bit of trouble to make sure that that's in the right spot, then I'll go ahead and, if you can see it here, I'm going to draw around, and I know you can't see it, but I'm going to draw around the outside edges of those styrofoam pieces on my body pattern. Then I'll know where to put it back after I add the glue. Now you can see I'm holding this flat on the table, because if I don't, then all the pieces of styrofoam are going to move, and doing this won't really help very much because they won't be in the right place. Now take my pin out. Put the glue right there on the spot where I marked it. And put the styrofoam piece right back where it was. I'm going to have to hold it on there for just a second so that the wax can cool. Do the second piece. Now the back legs are still stuck on, so, whoops, I see it wasn't quite right. Well, it's still just a little bit warm. I can move it back to where it belongs. It's really close, but not quite right, so perfect. Sticking everything together here. So that's it for our today's lesson. We now have a armature for our cat. It's going to help us build a really nice sculpture. In the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to fill this out with crumpled newspaper so it takes on the actual rounded shapes of a cat. And that lesson will probably go up in about 2 days. You can find it at ultimatepapier-mâché.com. You can also find lesson number 1 out there in case you happen to miss it. So, again, I'm Johnny Good, ultimatepapier-mâché.com. I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.